And a pleasure to welcome back my very good friend John Zogby. John Zogby is prolific for those of you who follow his work, and his work is impactful. It's been at the forefront of every major issue for the past several decades. I remember as a young producer in the television business, just coming out of journalism school, you know, if you didn't know the Zogby poll, you didn't know what you're talking about. And it, you know, to this day, I hope all of you are on John Zogby's email list, because he provides more insight and more explanation as to what's really going on than just about anyone I know. This new book, Neo-Tribes, you can get it right back there. And don't forget, the holiday season is coming around, so you can buy 2 or 3. They're excellent gifts. This is a fantastic book. It's Neo-Tribes and tribal analytics. I mean, this goes through who we are in the 21st century and helps us better understand who we are. When our CEO, John Hamre, read it, he couldn't wait to invite John Zogby back to speak here. And, as you can tell by today's turnout, he was spot on. Dr. Hamre is not here today, so he's a meeting in Williamsburg, so I'm a poor substitute to introduce John. But I will say this, again, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome John Zogby.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Andrew, for the invitation, and to John and to Brandon. Thanks for making it happen. Thank you for coming on this auspicious day, the third debate. Think of this as a support group, because I'm going to be trying to explain all this to myself while I'm explaining it to you. Okay. And then let me also, but I'm going to talk about this just a little bit later, but you're here for the election. You have political junkie stamped onto your forehead, and so I know you want to hear. So, Hillary Clinton asked the question herself, and frankly, it's too bad she asked it. It should have been somebody else. But the question she asked a couple of weeks ago was, why am I not ahead by 50 points? Well, it's a good question. It's a very good one. And I'm going to have some answers. But very importantly, a Democrat goes into this presidential election with huge advantages. Those are historical, electoral college, demographic, and the condition of the opposition. So let's take each one of those advantages one by one. First of all is historical. I mean, objectively speaking, if history is any judge whatsoever, you've got a president right now who's hovering close to 53% approval rating, which is very good for someone who's been in office as long as he has, in comparison to other presidents. You have an unemployment rate that's half of what it was when he began. You have real wages and household incomes that have been moving up, and moving up pretty dramatically, actually, in the last few months. Anyway, if you have someone in your family or your circle of acquaintances who's gay or lesbian or transgender, your life has improved dramatically in the last 8 years. You have more Americans with health insurance than ever before. You have the extrication of American boots on the ground from 2 very unpopular and disastrous wars, et cetera, et cetera. So historically, this is the stuff of which, quote, third terms are made. Secondly is the Electoral College. According to the Constitution, it's the Electoral College that ultimately elects the president. There are 538 electoral votes. The magic number is a majority, 270 electoral votes. If you just look at the last 6 elections, going back to 1992, the poorest performance among any Democratic candidate was John Kerry in 2004, 257 electoral votes. It's one state away. The other one who lost the election, Al Gore, received 269 electoral votes. After that, these were solid majorities. Not only solid majorities, they were huge majorities, 320, 332, that sort of thing. If you just go by those 6 elections and the states that the Democrats won, a Democrat pretty much can count on 242 electoral votes just by showing up. It's kind of like the SAT exams. You know, if you bring 2 number 2 lead pencils and you get a seat, then you got 200 just by being there. A Republican candidate can count on 102 electoral votes. All right, thirdly, in terms of advantages, are demographics. The demographics of this country are changing enormously. So, when Barack Obama was first elected President of the United States in 2008, 74% of the total voter turnout was white, 74%. And John McCain had won 57% of that white vote. That was not enough to win. In 2012, Mitt Romney got 57% of that white vote. But this time it was only 71% of the total, 3 points lower. And obviously still not enough to win. What about the non-white vote? Well, it was 26% of the total in 2008, and Barack Obama, all non-whites, about 75, 76%. In 2008, 75, 76% of the larger piece of the pie, 29% non-whites in 2012. Under normal conditions, the turnout would be, a normal turnout would be 31% non-white this election, 69% white. Given what the polls are showing right now in terms of levels of support that Hillary Clinton has among non-whites, Donald Trump would have to receive 77, 78% of the white vote in order to win. Tall order. I mean, McCain and Romney, I mean, 2 decent candidates. Not even close as far as that's concerned. Plus the fact that Trump has gone out of his way to insult pretty much all of the non-white voters and approximately half of the white voters. Okay. The fourth and final advantage, the condition of the opposition, is I'm going to shock you. The Republican Party is dead. R.I.P. The Republican Party as we know it doesn't exist, and here is the evidence of it. First of all, it's broken up into 4 factions, all of whom define themselves as the real conservatives, which is exclusionary to the other conservatives who don't meet their criteria, all of which is meaningless to millennials, only about 24, 25% of whom identify themselves as conservative. And, I mean, the final piece of evidence is Paul Ryan. You know, when in the history of humankind does the highest elected official of the political party say to his congressional candidates, "You're on your own"? That's not a political party as we know it. So, why is it even close? What you're about to hear may be injurious to your health. Hillary Clinton is a damaged candidate. She is not strictly electoral politics here. She was not the best for this moment in time. What the Democrats needed was what North Carolina basketball used to do when I was a kid before the 30-second clock. They'd be ahead 4-2 in the first quarter, and they just dribble the ball and pass it back, just run out the clock. I remember seeing one of those games on black and white TV, saying, that's what the Democrats needed to do. A little hope and vision may have gone a ways as well. Problem with Hillary Clinton is you don't get a sense of hope and vision. And look, I know her. I have advised her. I have liked her. And I have said to her, but I don't know who you are. And I think that's one of the things that comes out. So I absolutely oppose a $15 an hour minimum wage. And then in the second debate with Bernie, oh no, I've always been for that $15 an hour minimum wage. She negotiates the TPP, a signature accomplishment for Secretary of State, and then she doesn't only dissociate herself from it, she eschews it. And I just wanted a reason to use the word eschew. So, why is this even close? There's a natural gravitational pull here. Donald Trump, you see it now, bottomed out with that awful videotape with Billy Bush. Bottoms out at 35, 36, but right back up to 41, 42. These are the people who hated Bill Clinton, hated Barack Obama, hated, and they're going to show up to vote, and they will vote. Their boots and raincoats are hanging by the door. Every morning they wake up and say, is today the day we vote against Hillary? They can't wait. Her problem is she doesn't know who's going to turn out to vote. I don't know who's going to turn out to vote. If you look at the polls, just in the last 3 or 4 days, there's something in them for everyone. NBC has Hillary up by 11. Fox has Hillary up by 7. CBS has Hillary up by 6. LA Times, Rasmussen have Trump up by 1 or a tie or 2. So, why is that? Well, my business has changed dramatically. I mean, I go back, I started in 1984. You'd call somebody on a landline. Remember those? Call somebody on a landline and shh, somebody's calling from New York. They're asking me very important questions. Be quiet. I don't care if it's dinner. This is my civic duty. That's changed. Truth be told, I hung up on a pollster. I had done that back in 1998, one of my own polls, because the young woman called and said it was trained very well. She said it was a brief poll. I knew it was 87 questions, and I just didn't want to, I didn't have any patience for it. But I just hung up on one just the other night. She said it was a 4-minute poll, and when we got to the 12th minute, I said, are we kind of going to end all this? And she was getting into the, would this make you more likely or less? I said, look, I know all that stuff. I told you who I'm going to vote for. Nothing is going to make me more likely or less, but I have to do this. Oh, I know you have to do it, but I just don't want to do it. That's my confession for today. But please don't hang up on pollsters. What is behind the Trump phenomenon? There is an angry white middle class in this country that no one has been dealing with. We have been talking about the angry white male since 1991. It was the thrust behind Ross Perot. What explains that angry white male? Losing ground. In 2 words, losing ground financially, for starts. Now, I started tracking this question in 1987. I started asking, do you or anyone in your household work at a job that pays less than a previous job? And the answer was 14% in 1987. We were in the beginning decade of the structural transformation of our economy. You know, when dad and mom got laid off from manufacturing, they weren't coming back when inventories were reduced. They just weren't coming back. The company had left for good. Most recent count, 37%. 37%. And that's been a steady trajectory. No blips. This is not a factor of the Great Recession. This is what is. 37% work at a job or live in a household where someone works at a job that pays less than a previous job. So for the first time in our history, we have a decline in belief in the American dream. More importantly, what sociologists call, I call genuine, but they call status anxiety. Meaning, I'm afraid of losing my middle class status. Now understand, middle class is not an economic or financial term. It's here and here. It's how I feel. And if I feel I'm not in the middle class anymore, and I was, that is very damaging. And if I feel that my kids are not going to be in the middle class anymore, that as well is damaging. So in strictly financial terms, you have a sense of people losing ground, and they're angry about it. And who's been talking to them? Who's been helping them? Tom Edsall, who I always continue to think is the smartest person in this town. But Tom Edsall has written a series of brilliant pieces about the new haves versus the new have-nots. And it's not the 1% versus the 99%. We do not have a problem with wealth. I've asked questions over and over again about billionaires, and I get positive one-word associations. People aspire to that, or at least they don't resent it. What they do resent are people seen as not playing by the rules, or the same rules. And the new haves versus the new have-nots is the middle class eating itself from within. And translated, it means private sector, union employees, and non-union employees versus public sector employees, in the sense that you in the public sector not only have these wonderful advantages I don't have, but I'm paying for them. And that's where there's a lot of resentment. Now, this sense of losing ground is not only financial, it's demographic as well. We're talking about older white men. I have no problems with older white men. I just want you to know that. Thank you for appreciating the visual. But older white men, we grew up in a very different America. You know, all this talk about a majority, minority in 2004. You know, to most Americans, look out the window. Oh my God, Latinos, Asians, hijab-wearing Muslim women, Sikhs, gays and transgender, the sorts of things that were never talked about. My kids, meaning our kids, you know? We go to a wedding and the gay kids are dancing with each other and we look at each other. Our kids, there's no such thing as gay marriage. It's marriage. And the bottom line is that there are these, on top of my sense of losing ground financially, I'm losing ground in terms of my status in this country. I'm no longer important. And how do I know that for sure? Because nobody's talking to me anyway. Nobody cares about me. So then we get into America's role in the world. There was a time, very simple world, us versus them, right? Good versus evil. Virtue versus evil. Growing up in the 50s and the 60s, the maps were very simple. There was one area of the world that was gray, and you used to get black and white film of the ugliest people in the world attending a Communist Party meeting with Coke bottle glasses. I always remember, oh my God, the Bulgarians, they're so ugly. Then you meet Bulgarians and you say, oh, you guys have really changed since the 50s. But it was all so simple then. Now we have to learn stands. You know, we have to learn countries we never did before. There are nuances. But the difference more than anything else was when America said something, people paid attention to it. They wanted it. America intervened, it made things better, and then we moved on. That is the sense of an older, whiter America. So if you look at people 50 years of age and older, and the older you get, that is American exceptionalism, America the virtuous, and that is the America that they see. Look at Americans 50 years and younger, and particularly millennials. 18 to 36 years of age, that is not the America that they see. They see an America that is not necessary. They see an America that is loved. They see a United States that is in a country that acts in its own self-interests and doesn't always end up doing the right thing and doesn't extricate itself easily and maybe even does more damage than it does good. That's the battle line. That's the broad battle line ideologically among Americans, if not necessarily among the candidates. But the bottom line is that this is the source of Donald Trump. Now, can Donald Trump win this election? Most likely not. That's as far as I'm going to go. And I will bet you $50 that Hillary wins, but don't put $250 on the table because I won't take it. Because I'm not there yet. Because in all honesty, we do not know who's going to show up to vote. And any pollster that tells you is lying. That's why those polls are all over the place. We build what we call turnout models based on exit polls, history, trend lines, assumptions. That's artwork. That's not science. That's the artistry of polling. It's way too early. You know, when I read in the Times and the Post and the Boston Globe and elsewhere, millennials are saying, we're definitely not going to vote for Trump. I believe that. That's not them. 41% of millennials are non-white, for God's sakes. You know? I believe they're not going to. It's not who they are and what they represent. But I also don't know if millennials are going to show up to vote. And that's the difference. That is the difference in this election. And what you hear from millennials, I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump, but she's so yesterday. She's so corrupt. Where's the hope and vision? What does she stand for? Troublesome to some. So let me end with the key question that at least 3 of you would ask. Does being a woman make this any kind of factor in the election? I've already established my credentials as an old white man. I don't think so. I think there are 10 reasons to love and hate Hillary before you even get to woman. She is an entity unto herself, period. I don't hear, look, she fainted. If Barack Obama had fainted, fainting is fainting. Then she's playing with her grandchildren and then goes out and hugs a little girl to show she's okay, and then she says, I had pneumonia. Ooh, that's not good decision making. Nani's got pneumonia. Play with her for 90 minutes or so before she goes back in public. No, I don't get it. I think gender is a factor in the election, but I think it's Donald Trump and the locker room talk. He is definitely the candidate of old white men and women who aspire to be old white men. I have no idea what the hell that means, but but it's a damn good line, though, isn't it? And so let's talk this. I've spent a lifetime dealing with demographics, and demographics are very important. You just heard a whole lot of stuff about demographics. But demographics don't tell anywhere near the whole story about who we are. We are attributes, and we are values. We are defined by our heart and our mind. And especially in the world in which we live today, we're not defined by space and geography. We move around a lot. We're not defined by where we worship anymore. We're not defined by anything except how we wish to identify ourselves. And so I set out in 2009 with my sons on this journey with no assumptions whatsoever. What's important to you? What makes you tick? And how do you choose with whom to associate? And what would you call your tribe? So get this. We surveyed 4,000 Americans. We asked them 21 open-ended questions. And we analyzed them the hard way. The dining room table and the deck. Lots of sheets of paper with open-ended responses and piles, piles, piles. And some of the things were astounding. You know, what's two of the most defining moments in your life? I couldn't get over the number of people who said a personal tragedy and told me what that horrible personal tragedy is. They became the persistence on the basis of that and a lot of others. Questions. There's the God Squad, defined entirely by faith across religions. There were the go with the flow, those who seek balance. And I was so impressed by the fact that 50% were men and 50% were women. There were the outsiders. These are the people in college who played cards, you know, for a year and a half till they got thrown out of school, who all wanted to be Lenny Bruce and Richard Pryor, except there was one problem: they weren't funny. There were the one true path. Christian conservatives who don't want to talk about God, guns, and gays anymore. Christian conservatives who said, we want to talk about man's stewardship of God's earth, global warming. We want to talk about poverty in my community. Fascinating. There were the creators. Those are the entrepreneurs, the inventors, the artists among us. There were the self-perfectionists, wannabe narcissists, focused mainly on themselves. My ending line in that section of the book is, you're not going to invite them on a Saturday night for canasta to your home. They're insufferable. Well, will you travel with me? Thank you very much. He's not a plant, but it is working. I just want you to know. Here's what amazed me, because the book is titled, this came after the fact, and I should say I came in with no assumptions. We let people define their own tribes and ultimately name their own tribes. And it wasn't only the open-ended questions, it was then validation over the next 5 years. And the tribes just kept coming up within 1 or 2 percentage points. But we are many, we are one. There are tribes that are clearly at divergence with each other, and yet significant overlaps between, and counterintuitively, tribes that are very different from each other. And that's what I liked. The message to marketers, to political strategists, to HR people, to people looking for colleagues and friends, that don't focus on only the differences. Focus on the commonalities. We share more with people we wouldn't even think we shared very much with. So this whole chapter, tribal border crossings, where those borders are and what are the common messages that can be used. And so the book is on sale. As always, we appreciate your purchases. I usually end by giving you a list of books that I think you should read, but but I'm just going to leave with a list of books that I think you should buy, and that would be this book. Thank you, and I think we're going to do Q&A, right? Let's do it. And there's a mic. Thank you. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. All right, and there's a microphone coming up.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Zogby. Sonia Schott, Venezuelan journalist. I think we have an interview before.
Yes.
Years ago. How do you explain the Bernie Sanders effect in the Democratic Party? Thank you.
Yeah. There has always been a substantial progressive wing in the Democratic Party, and it goes back Let's just start with Gene McCarthy in anti-war, George McGovern, of course, Ted Kennedy challenging Jimmy Carter, and so on and so forth. And so there's always been that wing, Gary Hart to a great degree, and they come into the convention with a substantial number of delegates. I think you add the element this year of millennial Democratic voters who are tired of politics as usual, and authenticity. I can tell you, I spoke with Bernie Sanders in 1982 with the future of small cities. I had run for mayor of Utica, New York, and lost. He had run for mayor of Burlington, Vermont, and won. And when they say that Bernie Sanders has given the same speech for the last 2 years, no. He's been giving the same speech for 35 years. There's an authenticity about him, and clearly an authenticity that does not emerge from Hillary Clinton. So to some degree, he became the anti-Hillary as well. But it's really rather amazing that a man, one of the interesting demographic changes is how age really is not a factor anymore. Remember, Bob Dole was too old in 1996, and I predicted back then we're going to get septuagenarians running and nobody's even going to ask. They barely asked about John McCain. Nobody asked this year. But here's a 74-year-old socialist from Brooklyn who was almost completely devoid of any charm. And look, he won 23 states. Yeah, that's how I'd explain it. Yes?
Thanks, Andre Sobojo. A really edifying presentation. Thank you very much. I'm going to read your book. Now, the question is this. I, as you, don't have problems with older white males, being an 83-year-old white male. But
tell me what's in your coffee before we leave, okay? You look kind of good.
but here's my question. Why doesn't, and I agree with your analysis of older white males feeling left behind and the reasons for it. So my question is, why isn't there more impact, or why doesn't the, maybe the Democratic, whoever, make more of an issue of just giving everybody, meaning older white males, a little more information about being left behind, such as why did Speaker Boehner not permit a vote on the American Jobs Act of 2011, which would have created good-paying jobs for blue-collar workers. It was designed to do that. He wouldn't even take a vote on it. And so those kinds of things are why did W. Bush on economics go against the advice of his own Secretary of the Treasury, Paul O'Neill, who said, if you push the tax cuts through Congress, you're going to turn the Clinton surplus into a yawning deficit, which is exactly what happened. So why don't those things make more difference? Not to mention the pure moral evil of pledging to torture suspects who are captured, carpet bombing ISIS who are spread out in cities, and of course, murdering innocent family members of ISIS. Why don't those things make a bigger impact?
I would say because those are matters of policy. So number one, and one of the occasions where I briefed Senate Democrats, I tried to convey to them that there's a battle between hearts and charts. Democrats go to voters with charts, and Republicans go to voters with heart. And hearts beats charts. That's in its simplest form. Democratic Party is in many ways very mechanistic. And it also has, and one of the things you learn, and look, I am a Democrat, but one of the things that has always bothered me about Democrats and my fellow liberals is that sense that you're so stupid, and if you were informed, you'd be a Democrat and a liberal like me. That's a door closer. I got to tell you that. That does not work. Do not go into a bar in Cleveland and try that one. Or anywhere else, for that matter. And I think that the door closer emerges. And look, I think that WikiLeaks, to a great degree, is making that abundantly clear. You know? Now, there's arrogance on all sides, but Republicans do a better job of turning their populism into social populism than Democrats do in terms of economic populism.
I'm an old white woman Republican. I'm Barbara Bowie Whitman. I'm also a failed candidate to become a delegate to Cleveland. The people who did get elected were a 22-year-old who has always been a very active crusader for right to life, and the black former vice mayor of Alexandria, and another person who's isn't as easily distinguished as those two, but three of them got elected. And there were 16 of us competing for those 3 spots. Now, I am at the point in the movie where I came in. I arrived in this town in the fall of '64, and my first vote was for Barry Goldwater. I have been a hardcore conservative since I was 11. I wrote a song for Eisenhower. So I don't know where you'd put me in a tribe, and I'll read your book and figure out where I think you'd put me. But what you said about the Republican Party being dead comes back to my remark. This is where I came into this movie. We rebuilt it. I won't live long enough to rebuild it again. But what I don't completely understand within my own party is exactly how this happened. Young people didn't want me. I know that. They did want the 22-year-old. But I have a long and strong record in the party, and I was rejected. Not by a lot, but by enough that I didn't, I wasn't a delegate to the convention. But the divisions within our party seem to me partly the Reagan coalition has broken, and that there are new elements who are so frustrated that they don't care what they have to do to get where they're trying to go, and because they don't care what they have to do to get where they're trying to go, they don't care what happens to the rest of us, therefore we're in trouble.
That's it.
I want your answers to my theory on
Let me pick up right with that very last sentence. This is the essence of being an ideologue, which is I don't care if we win or lose, as long as I win the game. And so there is very little of that party unity and party sense of commonality. And so that's why I say this was before Donald Trump. This was happening. This is happening. You had mentioned Speaker Boehner. I think you were talking about Speaker Ryan as well. But yeah, but in either case, you're talking about guys that suffered, at the hands of not being able to control a caucus. Incidentally, the last Speaker of the House who left that position under normal circumstances was Tip O'Neill. Everybody else either got defeated or indicted. But no, I'm telling you that the party this time, I think because of demographic changes, the Republican Party is at a point where Humpty Dumpty can't put it back together again. And so you won't see a third party, you're going to see a new second party. And then a hardcore conservative third party, and then the dust will settle over the next decade somehow. But Democrats don't take any heart in that because it's right around the corner for Democrats as well. Yes? And then you.
Mm-hmm. Question on your book. When you're forming categories, I guess how did you end up with the number you ended up with? How do you know when to split and when to clump? And it seems like you could have 4,000 categories if you wanted.
Well, we did. We had a lot of categories, but we built our categories on the basis of what made statistically significant sense. So there were a number of minor tribes that we called emerging tribes. Didn't include them in the analysis because, out of the thousands of people that I talked to, they may have been 60 or 50, and I couldn't do the kind of statistical analysis that I could with 800, 1,200, and so on. That's one answer to the question. Another answer was that there were 12 tribes, and I was advised, don't do that one. And so I do listen to advice. Yeah.
No, they came back as Mormons.
That's a good answer. He's got a question over here.
Sorry. First off, thank you very much for the presentation. It was a great sort of tour of the horizon. To your point about, or the question about who will come out to vote, do you think there's anything that could happen, or what things will you be looking for that might kind of give you a better sense of who will come, and that might cause you to take that $250 bet as opposed to the $50?
Well, almost anything can happen because, frankly, almost anything has happened, already. And so, I was Hillary's lover for 12 years. I think we've gone down that road in the last couple of days. Maybe WikiLeaks getting a bit more attention. This is the irony of Donald Trump. He sucks up so much media attention that he sucked up the media attention that might have gone towards WikiLeaks. There's a real irony there. Donald Trump, as he said, I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and pretty much get away with it. He's going to get his 40% no matter what. Now, is that 40% of 132 million voters, which is what we had in 08 and 2012, then he loses. But is it that base of 40 or 42% among 123 million voters because millennials are turned off? And there's not enough of Democratic base to show up, that his vote will turn out. And it's what we call, in his case, selective screening. To some degree it is with everybody else, too. I mentioned that earlier. Selective screening. If I like somebody, I'm just going to screen out all information or make excuses. For that person. Yes, right over here. Yes, and then you, and then in the back. Mm-hmm.
Hello, my
Hi.
name's Doug Samuelson. I run a little consulting company here in town. A book I'd like to recommend, if you haven't seen it, is Game Changers by David Scott Mann, who was a special ops officer in Afghanistan and Iraq. And what he wrote about was how you take a tribal society and get them to generate a narrative that will appeal to other tribes. So you start building something like a democratic, small d democratic structure. I think that's what's going to happen. I don't think the Republican Party's dead, because I remember watching the Republicans regenerate after ideology triumphed over pragmatism in 1964. I remember watching the Democrats regenerate after ideology triumphed over pragmatism and led them to a disastrous defeat in '72. They did it again in the late 80s after that Reagan narrative reunited the Republican Party, which appeared to be dead after Watergate. Somebody is going to get out there, do what you did, figure out who the tribes are, and find a narrative that will get enough of them to collaborate for the Republican Party to, or something like it, to be a serious factor in 4 years.
Okay,
I think. What do you think?
Under normal circumstances, I think that that may be true. And 1964 to 1980 were normal circumstances, because what happened was that base of Barry Goldwater conservatives joined with the older children and some grandchildren of the New Deal who no longer needed federal largesse and were now identifying themselves as suburban taxpayers, and that built that conservative movement. I'm having a hard time with the demographics of the future of the Republican Party, in the sense that millennials are different. Now, we're going back to demographics here, but millennials just are different in terms of worldview. I mean, if the Republican Party is going to be anti-intervention, if the Republican Party is going to be inclusive, I mean, just look, you know, right now, 41% of millennials, Generation Z is even less white, and my 3-year-old granddaughter is in a 48% white category. There is no future for a white party, and it has to change, but I see no effort, at least in terms of the capacity of current leadership to make that appeal. And so that would be one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is will. And I also don't see the will. You know, I know Paul Ryan is a Jack Kemp Republican, but I knew Jack Kemp. You know, I'm not going to go through that whole thing, but Jack Kemp was unto himself. Paul Ryan, you know, I'm sorry for this, but Paul Ryan is not Jack Kemp. He really isn't. Way back. Mm-hmm.
Again, thank you very much for the book. I wish I'd had a chance to pick it up before you spoke. I'm Lauren Hershey. I'm an attorney. I've been a political activist off and on since college days in the 60s, so I don't know who's older here. We'll compare notes later. My question is, after the election, what will you as a professional be doing to evaluate what you determine out of the voting patterns, and when do you expect to publish something so you re-inform us, those of us who are here and are going to read your book? And then sort of along with that, what do you think would be best for the country to get done, let's say policy-wise, legislative-wise, in the first, you know, right through the August recess, if you have any opinion about that?
Sure. So first and foremost is a post-election poll in which I apply the tribes and see not only who and how they voted. We already have a good idea of how they lean and what their values are and what they see as important. But rather than get involved in the volatility before the election, we'll do it right after the election, and I will publish a series of columns, if not a white paper on that. Secondly, in terms of policy agenda, you know, first and foremost, something has to be done about education. And free education is not the answer. Some sort of incentives that reduce the cost of education. You know, I'll hesitate to use the word scam, but you know, today and tomorrow's students are paying for brick and mortar of 10 and 15 years ago. And we're in a situation, Jeffrey Salinga's book, College Unbound, this is the former executive editor of the Chronicle of Higher Education. We're going to lose at least 20% of our private colleges over the next few years because forgive me for the term, the Ponzi scheme is coming due, you know, and folks can't afford, you know, $40,000, $60,000, $65,000 a year shelling out or in debt. And so something has to be done. And, you know, I have a job right now, a part-time job as a director of an entrepreneurship center at my alma mater. And I have to be very honest with you. You know, when you get into, well, I'm not really the dean. I'm the deputy associate dean for this department. Meet my other deputy associate. Oh, come on, off it. I mean, you're just, you know, it's one thing to get titles and give people titles. It's a whole other thing when you have an upside-down pyramid, you know, and you just have so many people whose major task is balancing the cup of coffee from room 102 to 104. That's a little cynical, isn't it? Oh, I don't think I should say that now. It's Lemoyne College in Syracuse, and it's a very nice school. It's a Jesuit school. But this is higher education. You know, this is community colleges as well. I just think there's an enormous amount of capital waste from Harvard to CC. Tremendous amount. And in the next few years, you're going to have a revolt of major donors. You know, I gave you $50,000, and okay, you built the first sushi bar for freshmen. Now you're coming back 2 years later? And the problem is with Ponzi schemes, you have to keep going back, and at some point, folks are going to say, are the kids getting educated? And more importantly, are they finding work?
Isn't one of the main problems in education the fact that we've gone to doing it on loans instead of what people could pay for in the first place?
Absolutely.
I posited this question to the president of Mary, and he said, but we couldn't pay the salaries we do if we weren't financing them on loans.
Right. Yeah. Understood. Yeah, right here. And then you back here.
I'm David Smith of The Guardian. What impacts in this election do you think there has been from the media, from a decade of Donald Trump doing The Apprentice to his use of Twitter, to the claim that the media gave him $2 billion worth of free coverage at the beginning?
At least.
To Saturday Night Live now, is it sort of qualitatively different from past elections?
Oh yeah, has someone actually quantified that as $2 billion, David? Yeah, because that would even be a conservative estimate.
New York Times, I think, did a story.
Yeah, and basically, what it's been is a marriage made both in heaven and hell for the media, because on one hand, they're posting enormous numbers. He's wonderful copy for them. On the other hand, it sets the table perfectly for him to attack the moribund news media. So they both have this, it's a symbiotic relationship, isn't it? And it works so well for both. Have we ever seen? No, we've never seen anything like this at all. The discourse is the ugliest it's ever been. All the rules have been broken. You're supposed to make appeals to people, not insult and alienate people. And yet, he hasn't lost yet. He's coming close. It's most unlikely, but I still have extremely unlikely and most extremely unlikely to go here, and we're not at either of those yet.
Good morning. Rob Palmer, a Republican from Madison, Wisconsin.
Uh-oh.
I had to let that sink in. I would like you to go back and talk a little bit more. You talked about how the Republican Party is disintegrating. I'd like you to talk a little bit more about how the Democratic Party is disintegrating. In Wisconsin, we had 7 state legislators with challengers in the primary. All 7 were Democrats. Congressman Ron Kind had a challenger in the primary, faces no opponent in the general election. 2 state legislators came out and endorsed his opponent in the primary. Even Debbie Wasserman Schultz, no poster child for moderate Democrats, faced a challenge from the progressive side. Mm-hmm. So it appears to me that even the Democratic Party is on the cusp of a fairly sizable schism.
Yes.
Within the party.
They are on the cusp of a sizable schism. And again, we go back to millennials. And then following that, Generation Z as well. And in the case of the Democratic Party, it's structural. There are things that millennials agree with more about the liberal model, but not entirely. Not in love necessarily with big government, but they do want things done. But it's ideological and it's structural. The ideological part is that millennials are ushering in a whole new debate, which is libertarian versus communitarian. That is not the traditional liberal versus conservative. And those are two completely different philosophies. And there's also room for intersection and cooperation between those philosophies. Structurally, millennials do direct democracy and immediacy and act in a horizontal social network way to make decisions, as opposed to vertical and bureaucratic and slow. And so very simply, any political party that claims loyalty is just not going to get it. So in many ways, we're in a big transitional moment. I think the Republicans just beat the Democrats to the goal line on this, or I should say to the end zone. And the Democrats right around the corner until we have a realignment. But whatever the new parties are, they're going to be much, much looser. They're going to be enablers as opposed to entities that require loyalty. So one more question.
Joe Gould from Defense News, and I'm going to try to get in two on my one. So we talked a lot about presidential races, and I'm curious what you see as some of these, the impact of some of these trends on the congressional races, and what the implications are for dysfunction in Congress. And then because I'm with Defense News, I have to ask specifically about John McCain's race. What do you see happening in Arizona and also in New Hampshire?
Okay. All right. I think that was three, and that's okay. Okay, I'm going to try to remember all of them. First of all, the impact on the congressional races. You know, we have an ebb and a flow here that is very interesting. And then, when it comes to the Senate, there are races that were looking good for the Democrats that are not looking so good for the Democrats. Now, the Democratic Senate campaign committee just pulled money from Murphy in Florida, and yet a brand new Quinnipiac poll as of yesterday afternoon has them within 2 points. So it's very volatile. Last couple of polls have Kelly out ahead of fairly well among Maggie Hassan, and yet that's not New Hampshire, I don't think. I think it all depends on if there's going to be a wave or not. If it's a Hillary wave, I think you look for the Democrats to do well. Now, can the Democratic presidential candidate win in Arizona? Presidential candidate? Short answer is yes. Demographics of Arizona have been changing, and that is a transitionally blue state. But it looks like John McCain is in pretty good shape and probably wins. Okay, thank you very, very much, everybody.